My instinct is they're throwing Andrew under the bus. They, as you say, keeping the focus on the more. I mean, the police are on the more obvious crime, easy crime to prosecute. But also they're throwing the Queen under the bus because when I talked about the Queen supporting Andrew, I was pretty much vilified, and now they're leaking stories to the press, saying exactly that to try and protect the monarch, and that seems to be what the whole policy is at the moment.
Hi, all. Kinsey Schofield here. Welcome to Royally Unfiltered, the show that takes you behind palace gates like never before. Now, last week, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. So there is no better panel to break this down with me than two of the most authoritative biographers on his life. Andrew Morton, author of Andrew the Playboy Prince, a 1983 biography detailing the early life and bachelor days of Prince Andrew, and Andrew Lownie, author of entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, the 2025 biography of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, based on 4 years of research, interviews, and freedom of information requests. Thank you so much. Thank you both for being here. What a mouthful that intro was, but I felt it necessary to stress that I have two of the greatest experts in the world here today.
Well,
Well,
great.
that's very
Andrew
kind
called
of you
them
to
on the
say
way up,
so.
and I
I know,
called
I
them on
know.
the
I
way
just like
down.
to butter you up before we get the party started. I
Okay.
had Morton, Mike Graham, who made sure to tell me he used to work with you. He was like very like,
Did
oh, you know,
indeed.
we used to
Yeah.
work together. Was quoting you this week to me. He told me that you almost saw the potential April visit of King Charles to the United States as maybe a watershed moment. Is that true? What were you saying in regards to April? That could be a good moment for King Charles, or it could turn around public perception of the royal family?
Well, just that he's out of his comfort zone. He's there to glad hand a bunch of Americans who may not be quite so susceptible to what's going on, and the size of the crowds will be watched very carefully, and what he does and says will be watched very carefully, and of course, there's a congressional committee sitting at the moment. So this story is not going to go away by April. It will be going on for as long as it takes.
Lonnie, tell me, do you think that the April visit is potentially in jeopardy based on everything that's going on? I haven't booked my plane ticket. I'm I'm worried. I'm worried it might not come to fruition. Is that your thought process as well?
I think that it'll only be medical issues that will stop it. I mean, it's a very important visit.
Oh, wow. All right. And Lonnie, what do you think about the potential of King Charles coming in April? Are you still thinking that that's going to come to fruition?
Yeah, I think it will happen. I mean, I'm sure he's not looking forward to it. I'm sure Trump isn't his favorite person, but he can see the benefits of the trip. And I think, if it's still business as usual and there aren't health issues, I think he will go through with it. But clearly, it's a very sensitive moment. I mean, Trump has generally been quite supportive of the British royal family. He may claim not to have known Prince Andrew, but I think, he will, I suppose, be helping Charles, and I think they will try and arrange things so that there aren't too many uh, difficult moments.
I agree with you. He's good at managing that, choreographing that. Let me ask you this, Andrew Morton. There was an interesting story thanks to this is Russell Meyer's new book, William and Catherine, the Monarchy's New Era, The Inside Story, where Russell claims that Prince William urged Prince Charles at the time and the late Queen Elizabeth to banish Andrew after he attempted to defend his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. He says it was right after that BBC Newsnight interview. And, Russell Myers says that it was Andrew refusing to apologize for that relationship, refusing to acknowledge the actual trauma of Epstein victims. That was an absolute red line for William. Um, I want to believe that the royal family, and I know Andrew Loney is going to disagree with me, but I want to believe for my own personal benefit, Morton, that the royal family was kind of oblivious, but too many of these stories are circulating saying there was a warning here, there was a warning there. What do your insiders tell you, or what does your instinct tell you based on covering the royal family as long as you have?
Well, I mean, the idea of banishing Andrew would have been a bit strong at the time, although not so strong now. I think that obviously the rest of the royal family did not share Andrew's sang-froid with regards to the interview. They were horrified at the car crash nature of it, and it's set in train this journey that we've now come to. And certainly William was, as we saw just on the television footage of William at the Duchess of Kent's funeral. He was treating Prince Andrew or the former Prince Andrew, like a bad smell. So there's no question of the fact that over the last few months and possibly years, there has been debate at the highest level of the monarchy about what to do next. And I'm sure Andrew will agree with me that there is more information to come out.
Lownie?
Yeah, well, there's certainly more information
Yeah.
to come out. I mean, as you say, I'm disagreeing with you
I
because
know.
The Andrew problem has been around for a long time, and I mean, there were complaints, there were things in the paper, and he continued to be a trade envoy, for 10 years after these complaints came in. And there's no evidence, for example, after Fergie was caught in 2010 selling access to Andrew as a trade envoy, that the palace did anything. I mean, okay, by that he had another year to go. But there's no sense that, we're embarrassed by this. There was nothing in 2022 when Selman Turk's case in the High Court revealed that the Yorks had taken 1.3 million. Now, Andrew's right. I mean, maybe they couldn't have banished him, but they could have, I think, signified that this was behind the scenes even, and maybe that will come out, that that this was unacceptable behavior. I'm just amazed that there wasn't more pressure from the public on some of these issues. And I thought one of the interesting things that emerged today is that Charles seems, I mean, according to Epstein, Charles was one of the people behind getting rid of Andrew in 2010. Now, my understanding had always been it was Christopher Geidt who used the opportunity of him being in Canada to basically get him out, and that was why Andrew and Charles, why Andrew turned on him. Charles turned on him for other reasons. But I think there's a lot of disinformation coming out. My own instincts is William absolutely hasn't liked Andrew on a personal basis for a long time. You can see the reputational damage. Charles, I think, has been much weaker. And, there we had him, Andrew and Fergie back at Sandringham one Christmas only a couple of years ago. Poor old William being asked to drive him to church. But Charles kissing Fergie's hand at Ascot and all sorts of things. I think signals coming out were actually they were back in the fold and we kind of forgotten about everything.
Morton, did you want to reply?
Yeah, I largely agree. I mean, it's been a long time coming, and one of the things that is exposed is the fact that members of Parliament have known about this kind of behaviour. The fact that he was in for himself, he was filling his own pockets, and were unable to do it because of House of Commons protocol. And it's only now that they're now articulating what they felt 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's one of the areas that they're going to have to look at again. I mean, if the House of Commons cannot investigate what's going on with regards to trade missions on its behalf, then there's I think this reform is long overdue.
I mean, Chris Bryant, it's interesting. Chris Bryant made the statement in the House yesterday. I mean, he was clearly very critical of Andrew, but actually he was very critical in the press. I used a lot of quotes from him in the book, going way back when he was a Foreign Office Minister. And what was interesting, I know, Chris, is that he wouldn't talk to me for my book. He kind of shut up. There was this period in between where he wouldn't talk. But there are a whole series of MPs calling, for example, for a royal register 20 years ago, which is now being reintroduced. as an idea. But you know, people I mean, it's interesting looking at the cuts, just how much criticism there was of Andrew. The palace must have known about this. I mean, I've got stories of intelligence officials going to Christopher Geit with stories of $5 million in a suitcase and from Kazakhstan, and being sent away with a flea in their ear. And you know, we have the famous Amy Robach story from ABC Television, you know, wanting to do a piece on Andrew and Jeffrey, and the palace saying, "Well, if you do so, you're going to lose old access." And
And
ABC back.
it was access to William and Catherine's wedding, which is why it feels especially vulgar, because it's such a serious story, and the exchange is, if you do this, then you don't get this princess moment. You don't get this really, shallow access to the royal family for a royal wedding. You would hope that American journalists would have more integrity than that. But no, we didn't.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the Royal Rota, that's how it operates. I mean, you know, there is this pressure and patronage that's used to keep people down. You know, and that's gone on. I mean, you know, delineate the number of times the press went to the palace with stories which were denied, proved to be true, and then were given legal threats. You know, we've got it with the Sun front page story that Charles contributed to the £12 million hush money. The palace then came back and denied it. But I know from my Sun sources that they absolutely stand by their story. My source stands by saying exactly the same thing. And one of the journalists said to me, the palace are continually lying to us. And I think, I don't know what Andrew's experience of this was, but that's, you know, what I see time and time again. And that's what shocks me. You know, I can understand them be economical with the truth, but not actually telling untruths.
Morton
Well,
yeah, please
and
reply.
also on that basis, I mean, what's the reasoning behind the payment anyway in the first place? This is one of the conundrums that people are baffled by. And what was the role of the Queen in all this? What was the role of Prince Charles now King Charles in all this? What was the judgment call that they made? Who was advising them? What was the role of Amanda Thirsk, Andrew's then private secretary, in all this? I mean, there are so many unanswered questions, and there's so much which is still in doubt, that it's going to take quite a long time for this to be unpicked and to find out who was responsible for shielding Andrew from this. Because it strikes me, when you look at this whole thing in the round, the victims come a very far second to those with wealth, power, and influence.
Well, I think one of the things I found with my research is, and this is particularly true of the Yorks, they launder their reputation and enhance their social ambitions through their charity work, often with issues like trafficked women. I mean, Andrew had one as well, dealing I think, with Body Shop, closed down after a year, in effect, but once it had served its purpose that had been in the press. And it just seems a very cynical use of these charities in order to kind of paint them in a more attractive light. And I think if the palace is serious about addressing this crisis, they need to come clean. I'm sure they'll find a way to protect the king, and some poor courtier will have to fall on their sword. But you know, I think people do expect them to now be open about what happened, who knew what, when, and what they did. And I don't think it's good enough to say, well, you know, what sanctions could we impose? You know, there could have been reports, there could have been attempts to very easy to move him out of particular roles and to sort of punish him. The Queen was giving him the Knight of the Garter and Vice Admiral of the Navy after these allegations emerged. I mean, all the time there was basically two fingers. You know, how dare you challenge that my son isn't a paragon? Exactly what Mrs. Thatcher did with Mark Thatcher.
Hey, ladies, if you've been feeling exhausted, anxious, foggy, or just not like yourself no matter what you try, and your doctor brushes it off as a normal part of aging, you're not crazy. You're being ignored. The medical system has been far too dismissive of women's hormonal health for far too long. Joy was created by a woman who lived this frustration firsthand during perimenopause and decided women deserved better. Every Joy Lab includes a consultation with a licensed clinician who specializes in women's hormones, a real expert who explains what's actually happening in your body. Many doctors also never mention that testosterone is a critical hormone for women, influencing energy, mood, metabolism, and confidence. Yet, it's rarely tested. Joy offers real treatment options, including hormone or peptide therapies and personalized supplements tailored to what your body actually needs. For a limited time, you can add a 60-day supply of their estrogen face cream for just $1 with clinician approval. Stop guessing and start getting answers. Go to joyandblokes.com/Kinsey and use code Kinsey for 50% off your labs and 20% off all supplements. That's joyandblokes.com/Kinsey, code Kinsey for 50% off your labs and 20% off all supplements. Joy and Blokes, healthcare that actually listens to women.
Morton, is this jeopardizing the Queen's legacy? And did you ever think anything possibly could? I mean, she left this earth. We all called her our grandmother. We all mourned her all over the world. I am shocked.
Yes, I mean, when I was writing my book, researching my book on the Queen, it was clear that the one fatal flaw she had, well, two fatal flaws she has, was an indulgence of Prince Andrew, but also this inability, this what they used to call ostriching, putting her head in the sand and ignoring what was going on around her, and kicking the can down the road and not resolving an issue, not gripping an issue, to misquote Tony Blair, but to let something drag on for years and years. So, I mean, sometimes it was successful with, for example, Princess Margaret's romance with Group Captain Peter Townsend in the early 1950s. That eventually petered out and a constitutional crisis was averted. But with Andrew, this has dragged on, and the fact that they paid an estimated 12 million, either pounds or dollars, to take the currency that you wish, to settle this, and it wasn't settled. It just led to more questions. Is a classic example of the Queen putting her head in the sand and trying to resolve an issue without gripping the nettle.
But it might have worked. I think what's caught the royals out is the Epstein leaks. You know, nothing happened after my book came out. There were no claims, no calls for Andrew to be investigated. It kind of came out. There was a bit of controversy, and that was it. But it's the drip feed of this absolutely detailed stuff on Andrew, which is the killer. And they never expected this. They kind of hoped that Trump would suppress it. I mean, they may well have had conversations with Trump. Can you suppress it? And we owe that to the victims who've pushed this through and forced the Republicans and Democrats to get this stuff out. And I think that's what's happened. They've been caught on the back foot. The system kind of worked because we don't know all the stories that were suppressed. And just by sitting it out, they were okay. So they're now caught. I mean, it's always, the cover-up is always far worse sometimes than the original sin.
And the focus has moved away from the victims, sadly, to his behavior in public office. Yeah. And that has allowed more people to, as it were, come to the party to criticize Andrew and to make specific allegations that will stand up in court.
My instinct is they're throwing Andrew under the bus. They, as you say, keeping the focus on the police are on the more obvious crime, easy crime to prosecute. But also they're throwing the Queen under the bus, because when I talked about the Queen supporting Andrew, I was pretty much vilified. And now they're leaking stories to the press saying exactly that, to try and protect the monarch. And that seems to be what the whole policy is at the moment.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, not so much the monarch, but the monarchy. And this is what they've done over the years. When the Queen was criticised in 1992 after the publication of my book, Diana, Her True Story, and the fire at Windsor Castle, the divorce of Andrew and Fergie, and other things, the Queen agreed to pay tax, and that as it were, doused the flames of of anger towards the royal family. And go back further, during the First World War, there was a wave of anti-German feeling, and H.G. Wells, the novelist, he led a campaign for the royal family no longer to be a Germanic court, seeing their possible survival under threat. They changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor, as it's Mountbatten Windsor now. And
Yeah, I mean,
so when at a time of crisis, they're prepared to throw anything or anybody under the bus.
but only enough to not too much, just enough to satisfy public opinion. And I think the problem is public opinion now is kind of ahead of them. There's a very strong feeling, certainly I pick up, particularly driven now by social media, which wasn't there before. I mean, it'd be fascinating if social media had been there when your book came out, Andrew, if there'd been or when she died, a very different, I think, way of having to deal with the situation. They're having to fight on so many more fronts now in terms of controlling the narrative.
I did want to ask you, Lownie, while we're on the topic of cover-ups, you had some trouble around getting the information you requested via Freedom of Information. I was reading Andy Webb's book, Dianorama, where he talks about where he's talking about fighting for through freedom of information and struggling to get those documents that he wanted as well. Who is in charge of that? So is that the government, and is the ultimate objective to protect the monarchy there? I guess I don't understand. Who are we trying to protect in these different scenarios?
Well, I mean, when I was trying to get material on Andrew from the Foreign Office and from the Department of Business and Trade, it's those government departments. They do liaise. There was a sort of something called the clearinghouse where the Cabinet Office coordinated responses across government departments when journalists were asking the same questions from different departments and sharing information about the requesters and actually trying to discredit them. I don't know how much trouble Andrew had when his book came out, but I had lots and lots of false briefings against me, false information given to MPs when people ask questions, monitoring of not just my social media, but even visits I made to things like bookshops and festivals. And in fact, at one point, they refused to reveal information because they said they had so much on me, it would cost them too much. So, it is these government departments. They do it because there's a culture of secrecy and deference, because it's easier to say no than to say yes, just in case something sensitive comes out. Because the default mechanism is basically to give them the control of the story. They hate this idea of surrendering information. It's just a mindset, a civil service mindset. But I'm sure, whenever you mention the royals, everyone starts getting upset and decides that they just don't want to go there. It's like national security. It's just a completely verboten, absolute exemptions, etc. And then the states, it's very different. I mean, you ask for things under FRO largely. I mean, again, what Andrew's found, but I think he used it a lot. And they're very willing to put you to help you and aid you in your research. So it's just two very, very different traditions of dealing with freedom of information and transparency.
Morton, will the American DOJ dump force the British government to have to reveal more? I saw Keir Starmer saying that they weren't going to release certain documents associated with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor because it was an active investigation, which is a pretty suitable response. But will the American transparency force accountability with the UK government, especially when things feel so fragile right now with the UK government?
Well, I think you've put your finger on the issue that under British law that you can't publish evidence, that's material that may appear in a live investigation. And so what Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, was saying was that, yes, we'll publish documents of relevance, but not those that could have jeopardized a prosecution, which seems to me a fairly sound idea. I agree with Andrew with regards to the American situation, but having said that, when I put in a request for information on the Duke of Windsor, who was and his relation and what the FBI thought about it, I got 50 pages of black with
Redacted.
lines redacted information. So don't run away with the idea that the Americans are as willing to give up more willing to give up information than the Brits.
Well, I think the interesting thing is that often these files are closed at the behest of the British government. But the point I was making, I think, is they're saying that they can only release certain files that don't prejudice the trial. But the files that they're offering to release are those connected with his appointment, which should have nothing to do with any criminal charges that might be brought. But I mean, what my rather cynical mind suspects is that one of the advantages of a very quick arrest and investigation is it does become sub judice, and it kind of kills any proper discussion around Andrew. We will now kind of be censored until the case comes up, and the case could take years of investigation. I mean, that's the very easy way to show that you are doing your best, but this is a very complex issue, and we need to talk to lots of people, etc. And we'll all be long dead by the time anything actually happens.
That's a horrible thing to say, but you're probably right. Morton, what are your thoughts on the idea of removing him from the line of succession? Do you feel any way about it?
Well, he's what is he eighth in line to the throne? I think he's going to take up an enormous amount of parliamentary time. It's quite a complicated issue. There's no chance of him ever becoming king. I certainly would remove him from being Chancellor of State because that has a potential live issue, just as Prince Harry is no longer a Chancellor of State. But if it was easy to do it, I would agree with it. But I think it's quite complicated.
Yeah,
what do you think?
We need her, but I think it's slightly irrelevant. I think even Councillor of State, he's not going to be appointed Councillor of State. But I do think that also the royal family don't want any more discussions in Parliament about the royal family, so they're not going to be very keen on this. And again, I think it's a distraction from the real issue, which is, I think, transparency about the royal family. I mean, I'd like the Public Accounts Committee to open up their brief and not just look at Crown Estate property, but just the royal finances in general. And for Liam Byrne's Business and Trade Committee to actually look at the appointment, not just the appointment of Andrew, but the whole time he was a trade envoy, because he didn't operate alone. I mean, all these guys who were running UKTI, the ambassadors, were facilitating what he was up to. They didn't talk to me. They said they weren't interested. And I'm sure they weren't interested in talking to me, but they should be interested in talking on oath to the Parliament.
Now, Morton, I know you're going to hate me for this question, but Harry and Meghan and Jordan, it's been revealed that some of the employees at one of the youth organizations they were at have pro-Hamas littered social media, a designated terrorist organization. You've got them running around with Tyler Perry in Hollywood, who's been accused of sexual assault and harassment in civil court twice in the last 24 months. I think a lot of it is guilt by association when it comes to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Are Harry and Meghan a liability? Do you see any similarities? Lownie mentioned these charities that come and go. A lot of Harry and Meghan's charities have come and gone. Do you see any similarities?
The Hamas story is news to me, but that's catnip to the mass media. Quite frankly, the fact that Harry and Meghan are under scrutiny and under possible criticism from people is almost like you read it and there's a sensation of relief, because we're not dealing about the future of the monarchy or the future of the king or these weighty issues that are bothering Parliament. We're just dealing with these two up to their tricks again.
Well, what do you think, Lownie?
Yeah. Well, I think the royal family probably are leaking all sorts of stories in order to get the story off Andrew. Absolutely, the Harry and Meghan thing seems pretty small beer when you look at some of the issues around Andrew. And I have some sympathy for Harry and Meghan because, they were only trying to do things that Fergie had been doing for years, selling jam, etc., and weren't allowed to do it. There seemed to be double standards here. And you can understand why they felt that that they were kind of not being treated in the same way. So,
Would you not argue that the royal family learned some lessons through Fergie and thought, let's not go down that path again?
well, I mean, it took them a long time to learn those lessons. I mean, she's been selling basically her royal status since the mid 1980s, and they only came along, in the last few years. So they seem to be turning a blind eye to Fergie's stuff, basically until till the last couple of years, maybe when Harry and Meghan came along. So, and I just can't get over the fact that, there was Fergie back at Wimbledon, back at Ascot, um, given all the ways that she's embarrassed the royal family, going way back. Princess Margaret said, I don't think, you have caused more embarrassment to this family than anyone else. And that was way back in sort of 1992. They don't seem to learn the lessons.
Oh, Lownie, when is your updated book coming out?
Well, it's meant to come out on the 21st of May. I've got to start writing something, but the story keeps going on. So I don't know when to stop. I was going to stop when he was arrested, but who knows what may happen literally day by day.
I know. And Morton, would you update yours? I mean, you really focused on
Well,
Randy Andy.
well, the funny thing is, when you look back at Andrew in 1982 when he was in the Falklands, he was the pin-up prince, the Playboy prince, the world's most eligible bachelor, and it was I just started as a royal reporter, and my first gig was chasing Andrew and a girl called Koo Stark, who was an American actress, to the island of Mustique in the Caribbean, where everybody thought they'd secretly married because they travel under the name Mr. and Mrs. Cambridge, and so the world was absolutely, I mean, this is how the world has changed. The world was absolutely fascinated by this romance, by this character, and journalists and photographers from all around the world descended on this private island, Mustique. There was one journalist for the National Enquirer who even tried to hire a submarine to try and take pictures of of Koo and Andrew. I mean, that's how ludicrous it got, and it shows you how things have changed over the years. So that a man who was at his zenith, the most popular member of the royal family by far, because of his heroics during the Falklands conflict, is
Well,
now
what I find so
the
extraordinary
least.
is it is this great fall from grace, but actually people knew what he was like. I mean, and I don't know how much you had a sense of this, Andrew, when were doing the book. I mean, clearly it was more difficult to be critical of the royal family, but everyone. I had a lunch a couple of days ago with a childhood friend of Andrew, and he was well known as a bit of a nightmare, and really very odd. Um, and within those circles, they had no illusions that this was an accident waiting to happen. I mean, dozens and dozens of people have said this. I was talking to
Oh
someone just.
yeah, I mean, he was a horrible kid. I mean, he sneered at people on TV. I remember one story, a former valet told me that he was sneering at common people on television, and his father, Prince William, gave him a whack around the ear and said, "Don't speak to people about people like that ever again." So, yeah, the signs were there, even as a very boisterous, hyperactive youngster.
Yeah, I mean, the woman, I mean, without being too vulgar, a woman I just talked to who went to a dance with him when he was at Dartmouth, he came up to her and said, "Are you pleased to have the rock against your leg?" That was his sort of opening line. Um, Sorry, you may be cancelled again. So I mean, so people had these stories and they just kept quiet about them, and they kind of just come out of the woodwork now. Now they feel it's safe to talk about it.
Right. Well, I am going to, I'd say that that's the drop the mic moment of the show. The royal cock-a-doodle-doo is that's my favorite line. I'd love to see you back here together with me again, because I really enjoyed this. And of course, I have a million more questions. Thanks again to world-renowned royal authors, Andrew Morton and Andrew Lownie. Morton's latest book, Winston and the Windsors, How Churchill Shaped a Royal Dynasty, and Lownie's Entitled are available wherever you love to buy books. So make sure you go buy their books and support my friends. Thank you so much for watching. And if you agree with us or disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Thanks so much for watching, everyone.